lead us all in my version of just bringing us to this moment. So just take a deep breath. And I like to hold it for a couple of counts at the top of the breath. Take another. And then on the out breath, just sort of let anything fall away that needs to fall away. You can close your eyes or keep them open, however you prefer. And just take one more breath. And this time, when you're letting it out, just bring it all the way down your body, all the way down your legs, and all the way down to your toes and the bottoms of your feet. So deep breath in and let it out slowly, going all the way down. And when you get to the bottom and you can feel your feet on the floor if they are, just for a minute, just feel that connection. It may likely be a floor and not the earth itself, but close enough to be grounding in a home, in a space, hopefully in warmth. And just let yourself come into what we're going to be doing here and being together for this next almost hour. There's a lot going on in the world, and if we can just cherish this space and make it sacred by acknowledging that, then we can share in this space. And while you're in the process of bringing yourself just inward, but also connected to the rest of us here in this Zoom space, I'd like you to think, let your thoughts go to someone who you is either in your life or you met somewhere in your journey as a holistic educator, someone who seemed to think differently. And even that word differently is we're hopefully going to examine today a little bit. But someone who saw the world or looked out through a lens that was maybe one that you hadn't encountered before. And maybe it's different than the way you look at the world or see the world. And maybe it's different. Maybe this person processed information differently than you are used to. Or maybe the person that you might be thinking of, whether it's a student or someone you've encountered or a friend or a family member, or it might even be yourself, especially at a younger age. And just key into for a moment to how you reacted to that person or how you respond and how you relate. Maybe it's just not a problem, easy, and sometimes it's challenging. And key into what you learned from interacting with that person. And maybe if it did, how it might have changed your teaching practice or your understanding of humans or your understanding of children or your understanding of the way we learn and the way that we relate to one another. And try and just remember any detail about that person, or maybe it's several. And try and just remember what it's like to be with them. And if any of part of being with them is challenging for you, or joyful for you, or whatever your experience is. Sometimes individuals are just brilliant beyond belief in certain areas and equally challenged in other areas, so that there's more of a disparity that you notice, that one could notice, or more of the struggles can seem big as the gifts and the talents. And maybe the struggles are social, maybe they're academic, maybe they're physical. They could cover the wide range, the full range of who we are. And as holistic educators, as we consciously and mindfully be with children, with students, maybe they aren't children, maybe older students, but young people, we move to a place of relation and trying to understand one another and trying to open ourselves, just opening ourselves to the fullness of humanity and what holism really means in a person. And thinking back and just holding the person that you're thinking of that you knew or know or were or are, and just hold that for a minute and then allow yourself one more breath, one more deep breath, and just let it go. And as we enter into a dialogue about this particular topic, I'll have a couple of things to say to just kind of set a tone of where I've been exploring it lately. And then I'll just open it to whoever wants to share and speak. So one more breath and then bring yourself back into this space with these people. If your eyes were closed, you can open your eyes again. Deep breath in and another out. And then just allow yourself to be back in the Zoom room. And one thing that I wanted to share before I do open it up to everyone's input is that I've been working in the experiential education realm, sometimes called informal education, but it's not just outdoor education. It's had a lot of study and academic components, but also very experiential, project oriented. And I haven't worked in one school. My husband and I created a nonprofit that serves many children, many different, just a diverse spectrum of people in society, children in different schools or not in schools. And yet over the last 35 years or so, we have come across so many students who are labeled in a certain way, whether it's ADHD or there's one nonverbal processing. I mean, there's just a litany. And one of the reasons we know who has been labeled in a certain way or diagnosed in a certain way, not to make it sound like no diagnosis like that would be valid. I'm sure they're helpful, but to some, but the sheer number of medications that come our way because we require a medical history form before any student comes on one of our programs. So that's where I've just sort of researched it in a very, not researched, but just noticed it in a very layperson kind of way because I'm not a medical person. But noticing just what's happening, and it seems to be happening even more now. And so I became very interested in just doing a deeper dive, which I'm just beginning in many ways. It's when I say deeper dive, it's like ongoing into neurodiversity. And I mentioned a few of the books that I've been reading, and there are different podcasts and lectures and TED Talks, and there's a lot of really good material out there. And a couple of the things that struck me as really very painfully was re-examining this notion of normal, of what our society, this social construct of what is normal, and then working with now grown children I had known when they were younger, but still in very close contact with. There, one young woman in her mid-30s, starting to understand herself and starting to understand where she was not met in her difference, in the way that she grew up feeling abnormal, not just not normal, but really like there was something wrong with her. And so working with her at in her 30s, and then piecing these other pieces together of young people that I work with, and asking myself, how can I meet these young people in a better way? How can I understand them better? And kind of drawing on different experiences that I've had over the years and different people who I've come into contact with. So let me just take a look at my notes here, because there was a couple of things I wanted to do in this bit of a preamble. I think that's kind of how I wanted to start off. Just I'd really love to hear where this dialogue goes, but I'd love to hear your experiences and the ways you've met these different kinds of learning in different students. And I'd like to learn from you and your experiences. So with that, launching the dialogue part, I'm hoping people have something, stories, thoughts, observations, self-observation, and opening the dialogue.
So, I'm old, and I taught for a really, really long time, and I'm still involved at SOU. And the only tangible thing that comes up to me that I think that is important at this moment is my recognizing my own prejudice at a certain point. So I had changed cities. I had changed the actual job. I was going to now be in a high school in a very rural place. And I took over 6 weeks for what at that time was called special ed. And I didn't know how to do that. I was doing this long-term sub thing. And it was 5 really different classes. And one was all these rowdy boys. And I was great with the rowdy boys. And then another one only had 4 or 5 kids in it. And one of them, I'm just going to say, was named Pam. And she took her label and used it in what I felt was laziness. And it took me only a week or two for me to recognize that I was not going to be an effective teacher for Pam. The rowdy boys all over the place, up the walls, whatever, no problem. But what in my head was construed as laziness, I realized I was not going to be an effective teacher at that point for that person. I didn't know how to deal with that. That's my story.
Can I ask what did you do?
Well, it was a substitute, so it was this 6 weeks.
I
And
see.
that's not my major, that's not my minor, that's not my extra credential areas, So it just was this big recognition of, in myself, that's all. And I was an athletic coach, so I had all kinds of kids all the time, but she just represented for me here's the mirror, Kim. This is yours, and you're not very good at this, and therefore you shouldn't stay here, and that's not going to be helpful to her.
Debra, when you led that meditation and asked us to think of someone who thought differently than we do, And I realized, well, that's everyone. And so that was just like a little mini epiphany right from the beginning is well, if I just have that recognition to start with, that label or no label, everyone's going to think differently. And yes, there's probably people who are further away and more divergent than the way that my mind works and the way I see the world, and maybe those that are a little bit closer, but there's that difference across the board. And I remember, so, and then Kim, when you're talking about feeling maybe like not the right person for that particular child, and I have that question a lot for myself is, am I ready to work with a child who is divergent from the way that I am used to working with children? Am I certified for this? Do I understand enough about how that child's brain is working? Do I have enough patience maybe? And I think that's something I still question and wonder, like, you know, how much background do I need to have? And I think recently I've been playing with that question for myself when I work with students who come to our program, or I have a yoga student who is on the spectrum, and realizing, well, maybe I'm more capable than I think I am without having a degree or all this background. If I take time to just be with that child and start to understand what it is that they're presenting, and listening and finding different ways to listen to them, and trying to just move with their patterns rather than feeling like I have to come in knowing what that child needs, because that's probably what I would do with any child, is I wouldn't come in with dictating, oh, I know what this child needs. But whatever child, whoever it is, like, how can I just be with that child and take that time to understand what they need, and is that enough?
Yeah, one thing that is in mind right now from what Andrew was just talking about is that that component of patience, that I think teachers, when I was young, the teachers that were able to reflect that in me or in the class or in even their own thinking or even with the curriculum, and they just had a certain demeanor about how they were going about reaching that goal. And there was space around their teaching. There was it wasn't like a rush, it wasn't like a rapid pace, but it was a place filled with breaks and time to have a side conversation, time to laugh, time to joke, time to be playful. And so I was thinking about that, and I'm doing some masonry work, and one of the things that's kind of funny about it is the big stones actually tend to like stick more easily, so they take up more space, they just fill out better. But when you get them up there, they really don't move. But small stones take a long time to, like, a really long time of like holding them there in the mortar and just waiting and waiting. And it's just this small stone, right? So it feels like I'm wasting my time because it's this for so small of a space, but it just, and I was reflecting today, like, wow, I really have to practice my patience when I come to the small stones, because it's just going to take a while for them to stick. And so, yeah, I'm reflecting on patience right now.
A couple people came to mind. One's my grandson. Okay. And he's 16 now, and he's never been one to display a lot of affection, big hugs and that sort of thing. And for many months now, I've just been practicing, like when we greet each other, I just hold out my hand not to shake, just an open palm. And then he'll put his palm on mine. And then I'll get a smile from him and I'll say, good to see you. And that, you know, that suffices. Am I coming across? Okay. Um, so I wouldn't label him divergent necessarily, but he is very quiet. And then I thought too of a child in a classroom, and I didn't have a lot of experience with divergent children in a Montessori classroom, but there was one parent who was insistent that a brother of a one child be in the classroom as well, and he was labeled ADHD. And I had, you know, I had no experience. I didn't know what to expect, and he showed me right away what to expect because he just went to the crayons and dumped them on the floor and then looked at them. And so like in my mind, I'm like thinking, let's get down and pick these up. um, but I did learn from this experience because after a few days, somebody came in and made suggestions as to what I might do to help this child. And one was to make a storyboard of the day with pictures so that you could point to say, this is where we are in the day, and this is what we're doing. And then in a couple of minutes, we're going to be getting in line to go outside. And what I learned was that this was helpful to him, but it was also helpful to the rest of the class. So just learning that what you think you might want to do to help a child with problems is going to help somebody else too. And that was pretty great to learn.
I think that, I mean, I know I can relate to what everybody said, and learning to have, well, learning to see each child. I think that's one of our kind of core organizing principles. Our core principles is to meet each child where they're at and just and seeing through their eyes and feeling as much as we can what they might be feeling, and then to respond with patience or whatever is the most appropriate response. And I think, you know, I think what you said, Kim, is so perfect, because the ones that challenge us, it's like, okay, what do I need to do? And what do I need to learn here? What more can I be as an educator in order to be able to figure this out or just be open? One of the things that I've learned a tremendous amount by working with, being friends with, just spending time with the young woman I was referring to a little earlier, who's in her mid-30s now. Just learned so much, because one of the things that one of the ways that she just was able to cope when she was growing up was to be quiet. And so no one really knew what was going on for her, because she shut herself down at some point. But they thought she was, you know, it was like she didn't cause problems. She wasn't acting out. She was just quiet, but that was read as a good thing, you know, as a healthy thing, as it was okay. No one in her life that she can remember really stopped and said, you know, really found out what was going on for her and what it was that she was holding inside. And she does see things differently. She's tremendously gifted with animals, and horses in particular. And has a kind of a very highly tuned sensitivity to people's emotions and animals' emotions, but not so that it, at least at this point in time, not so that it translates to empathy, it's overwhelming. It's like it's too much stimulus and too much input for her. So for her to learn and to get the help that she needs, the guidance or the practice of someone to help her learn how to navigate the world so that it doesn't overwhelm her, but where she can build up a resilience and yet not sacrifice her talents and her gifts and her sensitivity. And it's been pretty extraordinary to watch her evolve over years. And I knew her as a child, but not well. Um, she attended some programs that that we were a part of also with families, but I didn't have that much contact with her as she was growing up. But she's just watching her kind of rebuild and re-navigate her life from a less pushed down, from a less repressed place. I wish she didn't have to. I wish that she had been met more in a way that worked and related to her and didn't make her feel alienated as a child. But still, she's doing the work now because we're humans and we can do that. We never stop, hopefully, learning and growing. But I've learned a lot, and since just working with her has changed some of my teaching practice with students that I encounter, and it does involve more self-examination, more not if I find myself making an assessment, questioning that, staying open, really looking, which does require patience. It requires a stepping back. It requires taking a pause sometimes and really understanding who each person is.
It's interesting to try and look for those gifts in every child. So even though they're not presenting with what we want them to come forward with and do this assignment or that material, they might have some other gift that we could potentially miss if we don't have that patience and that ability to look a little bit more deeply. So one of our students the reality is there's an impulsivity in his actions. Like it's not something, sometimes I think it's helpful to say, well, no, that's real. It's real. That's something that happens. There is impulsivity. There is fast movement. Sometimes there's lack of control of the body. It's going before the mind is going. And that's just what's happening. It's the reality. But when we looked a little bit more deeply and noticed where those impulses were bringing this student, wow, it's not that he's doing his own thing. He's listening to what the group needs. He heard a friend needs something, or he noticed that we need something for circle time, and he's going to get that item. And so rather than stop, where are you going? I mean, yeah, sometimes that has to be part of it. Yes, let's ask before we run out of the room. But when I noticed where he was running to, I just learned so much more about what was really going on there. And so again, taking that time to step back and see, and this particular student is extremely caring and really helpful. And so potentially missing that gift of what he's bringing to our space, I wouldn't want to do that.
And that reminds me right away with this sort of calling on her to help me, or just think of different ways to look at this. But the same person that I've been talking about, she remembers feeling really misunderstood and really judged harshly, not just judged as, not normal, because that was one part of it, but like with your student, it's coming from this caring place. He heard something and he wants to help, and he wants to help someone. But that part of him unless you're doing what you just described, slowing down, finding out, would perhaps never get acknowledged otherwise. And instead it would be more of a reprimand and more of a, and then it's from what a lot of the information that I'm getting from this person that I work with is just that feeling of not being understood for your true intentions or your true motivations can be suffocating. You know, it can be so hard and alienating because you've just done this thing and yet you may not also, and depending on how old the child is, may not, you know, be able to articulate unless the caring adult grown up can stop and go, whoa, and inquire, what's that about? What were you going after? You know, however you handled it, you know, and then they feel seen. They feel like they have they're not invisible. This person that I work with often felt invisible as a child because of that very thing, because her intentions were not misunderstood. And she didn't necessarily have the capacity to articulate what she really needed without someone stopping and finding out.
Yeah, Deborah, she didn't have that capacity at that time. So what's been coming up for me is developmental models. So I don't have training in neurodiversity. I have a friend that I invited to this because she does. She's not here, so I can't have her explain it to me. But I look at the story of somebody who's very young, can't articulate, versus this gal who's 30 now, who can articulate, and wonder at the arc of that development. So the gal that I was talking about, you know, was probably a junior, senior in high school by that time, and had developed her defense mechanisms and developed, you know, how to keep herself emotionally safe, which to me was like, geesh. I mean, and what you're talking about, Andrea, is I think a whole different age category. So it just brings me to more of what I don't know about this, in what's the arc of development, and is it different for different categories of neurodiversity? You know, I don't know anything about it. And it's getting dark here. And so if you can't see me, well, we'll try to do something about that.
I was thinking the same thing for my picture. It's like, okay, it's definitely getting dark. Yeah, I've thought a lot about, just because I've not just because, but also because I work a lot in the developmental realm and really keying into what are the developmental needs of a certain stage and how does that translate to different ways of different wiring, you know, different neurological wiring. And it's so interesting that you would bring that up, because one of the things that I am kind of starting to notice with this young woman in her 30s is that she seems to be going back and experiencing, because her behavior sometimes is that of a different stage. It's not of the stage that a 35, 37-year-old would be in. It's more like a teenager. And she almost can't control it at times. Like it can be, she can control when she lets it out, but it's to certain relatives, let's just say. And at first, you know, I thought it seemed more like this, you know, like I was talking about, this sort of repressed energy and emotion, and then finding out that she didn't have to be that way anymore. So it was more like a catharsis. But so much of the way that she was reacting was so much like the developmental stage of, you know, like 14 to 16, kind of right around 15, right in the teenage years. And now it's so fascinating to me because sometimes I'll point that out to her as she is a adult, or sometimes I'll just sort of talk to her as if she not, you know, not condescendingly as if she's 15. That would be rude, um, but just sort of maybe some of the word choices and things like that might be more asking her questions that a 15-year-old might feel heard if they were asked these questions. But now what seems to be happening is she seems to be moving into that next stage, which would be more, which is, and she'll go back and forth a bit, but the next stage out of that more intensive, will driven, ideals driven stage into a more reasoning capacity and more ability to feel, you know, to appreciate other people, even if they aren't perfect, even if they aren't kind at times, but being able to have a much bigger breadth and also to self-reflect in a way that I hadn't experienced her doing before. You know, how much does that have to do with that she wasn't met in her uniqueness and in her developmental stage as a child? And so it needed this time. You know, I don't know. I mean, it's not, you know, I'm not a neurologist either. I'm not a neuro. This is all stuff that I'm just starting to look at in a different way. But the developmental piece, I think, is really, really important. It's important always for me, I think, to meet a child in their developmental moment. But with the added understanding that not everybody is that there is this different wiring, like you were saying, Andrea, that there is nobody's different. We're all different. You know, it's but that even that concept, it's really, I mean, you can hear me. I kind of, you know, it's hard. I struggle with it. It's not that I want to. It's not like I'm trying to force my old way of looking at it. It's just I almost don't even have the language for it other than to go back and just stay really open to seeing through someone else's eyes and feeling what someone else might be feeling and really trying to meet them in with who they are.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's difficult in a group environment, you know, sometimes for me to know to decipher if it's a good opportunity to really, you know, because we work with from 4-year-olds to 13-year-olds right now. And, you know, one of the questions I often ask myself is this appropriate for this group at this time? You know, because there are some comments, some remarks about, you know, especially about serious things like death, you know, came up. We had a cat that was lost for a week and she just came back at the farm and it's been wonderful, but she, you know, she's in pretty rough shape. And, you know, so some of the students were talking about it and it's, you know, it's like, you know, we have a 4-year-old at the table and we have an 11-year-old at the table. And it's like, well, I just don't know. It's like, I want to have a certain conversation about this with the 11-year-old that I don't want to have with the 4-year-old. The language I'm going to use, and then the language I'm going to use for the 4-year-old, I don't want to use that language for the 11-year-old. And so it becomes really hard to decipher, especially in group dynamics. And I imagine, you know, we just have class, you know, we have a range from 6 to 8 students usually. So for us, it's even very manageable and approachable, and we can navigate those waters typically pretty well. But then for bigger classrooms or bigger environments where, you know, I mean, I remember in, teaching in Thailand, and like there are some students that like I knew I needed to, that they just needed more attention. They needed more time. They needed more focus. We needed more closeness that I just couldn't give them. I couldn't give them. It was not the right environment. It was not the right amount of time. There's 28 other students that need my attention to some degree, and it essentially becomes a question in a way of like, how do I do the least harm possible in this situation? How do I, because I know that this student needs more than I can give them, but I can't give, it's impossible in the moment to meet them where I would want to meet them. Um, and so that, it's challenging, and right, like you were saying at the beginning of the call, Deborah, like the more medications, the more intense chemistry that's rocking from left to right, and side effects, and just drowsiness, straight up drowsiness. I mean, it's a lot to then, as educators, to have to put that into the soup of how to, you know, uh, express something in a moment, or how to give attention, or um, yeah.
Yeah,
I was really, oh,
Robin, go ahead. Good to hear your voice.
thanks. Um, I was thinking a lot about the kids in Thailand too. Him and I both, we taught in similar grade levels in the middle school. And we had a lot of divergent thinkers and behaviors, and we had a class of 25 to 30 students. And that group dynamics was huge. And it was hard to navigate that. And sometimes what I ended up doing my very first year is I like bank. Nobody told us the diagnoses of the kids in Thailand. We just had to see how different they were. Maybe that was better. I don't know. But like bank couldn't do the work that the other kids could, and I ended up working with him separately. And I discovered he couldn't do the kinds of assignments I was giving at all, but he could tell stories about things he liked to tell stories about. And then he could start to put those into English. But it was really hard in the confines of a particular situation where we had anywhere from 75 to 100 kids total, and we'd have anywhere from 5 to 10 or more that were very, very divergent in their needing to be in their bodies in different ways. Their attentions were really different, and we were only one teacher with all those kids, and sometimes like another one, Pun. Camden would remember Pun. All the English teachers loved Pun because he loved us. It was easy to get to know him, but in my classroom, he was a year or two older than the other kids, and he just didn't have a lot of self-control, and other than just kind of shutting down when he was around other kids. So trying to figure out what were the ways to help him develop social skills, because it seemed like even though he had social skills with the English teachers, he didn't have social skills in the classroom. And learning to notice what put the kids at ease in different social groupings and dynamics, and kind of meeting them where they were, it was never easy. It always went beyond challenging me to making me feel like, oh, I'm not doing what I should be doing, because yeah, there was a certain level of frustration when you were in a classroom with too many kids. And you would get to know them all, but navigating it and when you're not even in their native language to boot, it was really hard. Yeah. And then I'm thinking of all that now with what I know now too, about how different my brain is right now than it was a year and a half ago. And thinking how kids' brains, they don't see the world in the ways that we think they see it. Even when we're trying to see through their eyes, I don't think, even most of you in this call are good friends of mine, and you know a lot of the things I'm going through, but it's just so hard to explain to people when you start to have differences and you're not at all the same as what you were, and the kids don't know that they're different. Or they do in some ways, but not in other ways. So it's very complex. Yeah, I'll stop.
What I wanted to say, Robin just alluded to, which is it makes so much difference in how many kids, Cam, you're trying to deal with at a particular instant. If you've got 28 kids and you're trying to do a thing, then that's way different than the 12 years that I spent at a continuation high school. And I could, everybody was on their own contract and everybody was doing different stuff, but I knew what it all was. And that was a much more doable situation. You know, I had a kid who was schizophrenic. So, you know, that's all right. He's schizophrenic, but that's not all right if you have 28 kids in a class and you're doing a particular thing. So, Deborah, I must have missed right at the beginning because it feels like there's something specific you wanted really to attend with this topic. This gal who, as a kid, was this way, and then there's this developmental arc, and here she is. So I'm sorry, it's the way I think, you know, like the Bucky bars. But it's developmental levels and the arc of, and it's the logistics of having to manage a group. And I'm not trained, you know, I don't know who, you know, in a particular situation, how we attend that. So I just want to be straight up with you, Deborah. If there's something in these last few moments or minutes here that we could focus on, if there's a question, I'd want to hear it.
Not really, just no, this has been great. And
Okay.
I've just been, like I said, I was inspired to do this deeper dive, and I'm still doing the readings, and you know, it's just really fascinating to me. And also, Robin and I have been, you know, there's a, you know, kind of just, you know, what's out there and what's out there for healing a traumatic brain injury, and how is the brain, you know, what is happening with the brain. And we just, you know, she found this fascinating doctor that, you know, we both listened to the lecture and went, oh yeah, he's nailed this and this and this and this. He understands, he's got it. And so I think that we're just, you know, we're on this little marble in the middle of this huge whatever it is, and we're trying to figure ourselves out, and we're trying to, you know, be educators, but be learners. And I think it's just all like, you know, sometimes we do get kind of, I'll go off on a certain track and then it all kind of leads back to the same place, right? Okay, so I kind of brought up neurodiversity, but then we came back to developmental needs and the developmental arc and the, you know, the brain. And I love that, you know, there is one thing, Kim, in the book, in the one normal sucks. He does in chapter 2, he does go through the background. It's real. I love this book, but he does go through the background and talks about that, how this concept of normal has its basis in eugenics, and how, you know, and so, I mean, how painful, how awful. And yet, and we could have maybe have a conversation about that sometime, I don't know, but knowing that and just, I mean, I knew it was a social construct, but when I really got the horrific basis of that, you know, it's like, what is our job? What is our how do we bring connection and love and understanding and really support for whatever young people, whatever age, whatever stage they're in, that we encounter in our lives, whether they're our students or our grandchildren or our children, it doesn't matter. It's just, you know, I think all these dialogues that I've been a part of, it's always come back to, you know, self-work, self-knowledge, knowing who, you know, understanding who we are so that we can then be open to one another and to the love that surrounds us that we may not always be able to access. So this, I really appreciate this. I really appreciate you all sharing and just touching into this. And then I think that the last piece that I did want to give was just our social conditioning. You know, if it will decide how we respond. It will be the one who responds to whoever we're encountering if we don't look at it and understand where it might have come from, whether we were aware of it or not. And I'm referring back to the concept of normal and growing up in the public school system in the Bay Area, which was kind of the birthplace of eugenics, actually, at Stanford University. So just, you know, finding all those cracks and going, okay, that one, that one, that one, those layers. I don't know. I think it's important to do what we all do, what we all set aside time when we can to gather in this way and go into these realms. So thank you. And I'm going to check the time. It's 5:28. Does anybody have any closing thoughts or anything that you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just had one quick thing to add that came up right as you were finishing there. And that's, you know, I think so much of thinking that can get us into trouble and to get us boxed in, to get us into that normal state, it's very like two-dimensional thinking. It's thinking based on language or based on charts or based on, you know, these images that only exist on pages, really. But when thinking can become more three-dimensional, more robust, have more depth to it that it's referring to or calling in, you know, and especially with dealing with, I think, neurodiverse individuals, ourselves, even our own life, this life, to get away and move beyond just right, the hard data, the hard facts, you know, the things that can be put on paper that maybe we've internalized as being, you know, the compass to follow. And so, yeah, I think it's important. I think it's important to honor that the thinking that involves more space to it, that more dimensionality to it, rather than, you know, such linear thinking.
I like just staying with that question of how do we go beyond normal and how we just see the world. It's helpful to put that question out there as I don't need to be normal. And then say, so, like, to realize that we do have this norm inside of us that I want to move toward, or we want to move the kids toward, and that we don't have to do that. We can say, oh, I'm having a bad day today, and that's okay. I'm not normal. That, yeah, just that questioning of normal. Thank you for bringing that to us today.
Thank you. All right, so do I turn it back over to, oh, go ahead,
Nope,
Kim, sorry.
I was waving because I
Oh,
was,
you were waving goodbye.
I was waving.
Do I
Thank
turn
you,
it back to you,
Deborah.
Andrea?
Yeah, this is wonderful. I appreciate you bringing this topic up. I appreciate you bringing a topic that you're still in the process of learning about, and so that we can explore it together. And like you said, I think it's a concern and something that's rising in our society and our children that we should be aware of and be having these conversations about. So I really appreciate that, and continue to stay in our consciousness as we go forward in our day and our week. So thank you, everyone.
Thank
I'm
you, Andrea.
waving
Thank you
again.
for inviting me.